Have you ever been called a professional victim just for asking for a more compassionate world? Ever been accused of having a victim mentality simply because you talked about how society fails people like you? Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist, and today I want to talk about something that hits very close to home, not just for me, but for many people in our neurodivergent community. I talk a lot about structural ableism, how the world is designed around neurotypical norms and punishes people who don't fit that mold. I talk about the need for accommodations, the impact of trauma, the shame we carry, and the importance of self-compassion. Not because I want sympathy, but because I believe we all deserve to live without shame. But every time I speak up about this, I get told I'm playing the victim. Why is advocating for social support so often misread in this way? And most importantly, what does this tell us about our culture? When I talk about autism or ADHD, I'm not talking just about quirky traits or productivity hacks. I'm talking about real lives, real people trying to function in a world that wasn't designed with them in mind. When I advocate, I'm advocating for equity, for dignity, for spaces and systems that make room for difference instead of punishing it. I'm not asking for anyone to lower their standards. What I'm asking is that we acknowledge that one size fits all doesn't fit all. In fact, it often harms the people who need the most support. Accommodations sound like charity, but I believe they're how we level the playing field. They're how we give people a fair shot at being seen, heard, and understood. And yet, whenever I say that out loud, I'm met with resistance. People assume I'm asking for special treatment, or that I'm encouraging people to wallow in their diagnosis rather than overcoming it. But what I'm really doing is saying, you deserve to live without shame. You deserve to stop fighting for basic recognition. You deserve a life that works with your brain, not against it. When I talk about neurodivergent trauma, when I talk about internalized ableism, I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for me or for fellow neurodivergents. I'm asking people to consider the cost of invisibility, the cost of constantly pushing through, the toll it takes to live in survival mode when masking becomes second nature and burnout becomes baseline. Because I've lived it, and so have the people I serve. So when I speak up, I'm not complaining, I'm truth-telling. I'm about creating space for someone to say, wait, you mean it's not just me? And to finally exhale. And here's what's so important. And I don't do this for pity. I do this because I believe we can do better, that we must do better. This is idealism. This is hope. And I think hope is the bravest response to systems that try to crush it. You think compassion would be uncontroversial, but strangely, it's one of the most threatening things you can offer in a culture shaped by ableism, capitalism, and toxic individualism. Because when I talk about making life easier for autistics and ADHDers, when I say we need accommodations, understanding, and basic support, people don't hear compassion, they hear threat. Not because it's unreasonable, but because it confronts something deeply buried in their worldview. It forces them to acknowledge that the system isn't fair, that it's never been. And instead of sitting with that discomfort, many people lash out, not with logic, but with cruelty. Here's what some people have said to me verbatim. Everybody has trauma. It's how you deal with it. No use being a victim. Man up and get on with your lives. Sounds like a professional victim to me. Everyone wants to self-diagnose these days. This is a first world problem only. To make this a thing about neurodivergence is annoyingly obnoxious. Everyone gets that exact mindset. You ain't special. How many more ramps and stalls in the bathroom do you need? Structural ableism? Lol. There's a new ism every 5 minutes from the constantly triggered. For some of us, it might be easy to laugh these off, but they're revealing. They seem like insults, but they actually represent worldviews. They expose how terrified some people are of vulnerability and how quickly that fear turns to scorn. I believe these comments don't come from critical thinking, but sometimes from grief, from people who were never allowed to have needs, so they resent anyone else who does. Because compassion doesn't just help the person receiving it, it shines a light on the pain of those who went without. These harsh responses are in fact rehearsed scripts, echoes of a culture that tells us, if you're struggling, it's your own fault. This is the myth of rugged individualism, the belief that strength is about doing everything alone, that if you didn't succeed, you just didn't want it badly enough. It's part of almost every system we live under: capitalism, education, employment, and it's especially potent in places like the US, where independence is moralized. You're not just expected to be self-sufficient, you're supposed to be, even if it kills you. That's why when I speak about support, about collective care, about accommodations for autistics and ADHDers, I'm not just making a practical request, I'm poking a hole in a foundational myth. And people will do anything to defend that myth. It's not about ableism, it's about personal responsibility. Everyone deserves acceptance, but this crosses into entitlement and privilege normal people don't get. Everyone's pretending to have ADHD these days. These comments try to position neurodivergent needs as illegitimate, excessive, even fake. Because if we start recognizing neurodivergence as needing and deserving support, then suddenly the bootstraps narrative starts to unravel. Because if we need help, maybe they did too. And if we deserve compassion, maybe they were denied something they should have had. But instead of sitting with that realization, people double down on the myth. They tell themselves that they're the strong ones, that anyone who asks for more must be gaming the system, faking, entitled, coddled. It's easier to believe that than to face the truth, that the system never cared about any of us, that we've all been set up to fail, that many people who are functioning are only doing so by burning themselves out. So the narrative survives, and people continue to cling to it and the emotional protection it offers. The myth of meritocracy, that if you try hard enough, you'll succeed, give people a reason to keep going, even as they suffer. And it gives them a scapegoat, someone to blame, when that suffering becomes too heavy. That's why when I talk about systemic injustice, people hear accusation in the place of advocacy. That's why when I say we need more support, they hear you didn't work hard enough. That's why they call me and others like me professional victims. Because as much as we're asking for change, we're challenging their survival story. And that can feel like betrayal. Let me be really clear about something. I didn't arrive at this perspective because I gave up. I arrived at it because I kept going, even when everything around me said I shouldn't have made it. I moved out of my family home at age 17. I navigated cities, states, countries on my own. I enrolled and completed 3 separate master's programs. I pursued multiple careers. I pushed through chronic illness and undiagnosed neurodivergence. I lived, worked, survived, all without asking for help I probably should have had. Because, like many neurodivergents, I internalized the message that asking for help meant failure, that needing support made me weak, that masking and muscling through was the only way to survive. So I didn't complain, I overachieved. And for a long time, I thought that was strength. But here's the truth. It nearly broke me. Often, I just barely pushed through shame, anxiety, and burnout. I was drowning quietly because the world told me that sinking wasn't allowed. Often, I was just barely pushing through shame, anxiety, and burnout. So now I speak, not because I want pity, but because no one should have to go through that alone. I'm not throwing a pity party. I'm refusing to pretend that resilience should be a requirement for basic dignity. What I advocate for now is not a lowering of the bar, but a recentering of our humanity. because even the strongest among us need care, and because I finally found my voice and use it, not just for me, but for anyone who's still out there trying to convince themselves that they're just lazy, broken, or not trying hard enough when they're really just neurodivergent. If you're not autistic or ADHD, it might be hard to grasp just how much we're navigating beneath the surface. Neurotypicals don't see the relentless juggling act of invisible struggles. They don't see how we've been pathologized, dismissed, or completely ignored by the systems around us. So let's talk about what that really looks like. For example, we might experience executive dysfunction. We have trouble staying organized, and we feel paralyzed at the thought of starting a task. We might know what needs to be done and still be unable to do it. Then there's sensory overwhelm. Walking through a grocery store and feeling like your nervous system is under attack from the lights, the sounds, the smells, and we get told that we're being overreactive because no one else sees what we're experiencing. Then there's social anxiety and rejection sensitivity, the kind that doesn't just make you nervous in a room full of people, but makes you question every word you said for days after. That makes you mask so hard you forget who you really are underneath. Then there's burnout, the kind that leaves you unable to function for weeks or even months. And because it's invisible, people assume you're just being irresponsible. Many of us also live with co-occurring health conditions, things like chronic fatigue, chronic pain, migraines, gut issues, or connective tissue disorders like hypermobile spectrum disorders or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. These issues are often underdiagnosed and undertreated. Then there's the emotional weight of constantly trying to measure up in systems that are never going to bend for you. Families that think you're too sensitive, schools that punish you for being distracted, workplaces that expect robotic consistency. The world demands that we perform like neurotypicals when that categorically might be impossible. And when we ask for support, we get hit with the same tired lines. That's just life. Everyone struggles. You want special treatment. You just need to try harder. But as much as people want you to believe otherwise, these aren't character flaws. They're unmet needs. And naming them isn't about wallowing. It's about validating the lived experience of millions of people who are told their suffering is imaginary. We deserve better than invisibility. We deserve systems that recognize these challenges and meet them with support, not shame. Here's something I've learned from years of doing this work, not just as a therapist, but as someone who lives it. Ableist responses aren't always about hate. A lot of the time, they're about fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of being seen as weak, fear of realizing you've been carrying pain you never named and never allowed yourself to feel. So when people hear me talk about structural ableism, about how the world isn't built to support neurodivergence, they don't just disagree. They panic. They lash out. They make it personal. Because the moment someone admits that accommodations might be necessary, that care might actually be a strength, it threatens everything they've been told about how the world works. It threatens their coping mechanisms. It threatens their identity as someone who pushed through and never complained. And it forces them to ask a terrifying question. If I had needs, why didn't anyone care for mine? And so they project, they ridicule, they gaslight. They don't want to believe that suffering should have been met with support, because then they have to grieve that they didn't get it. So rather than reason it out, they project. And that's why I don't take it personally anymore, because once you see that the resistance isn't about you, it's about their fear, their shame, their buried grief, it becomes easier to stay grounded. Still, it doesn't make it any less harmful, because this fear, this ableist fear of vulnerability, does real damage. It silences people. It isolates them. It teaches neurodivergents that asking for help is dangerous, that being visible is unsafe, that being honest is unacceptable. And that's exactly why we have to keep speaking up. Because the antidote to fear is not silence. It's truth. It's connection. It's compassion. We've been taught a lie. We've been told that strength means never needing anything, that if you're tough enough, independent enough, driven enough, you'll succeed without help. But that's not strength. That's survival mode. And as much as we want to act like survival mode is noble, it's really, at the end of the day, a trauma response. Real strength means knowing that you have needs and choosing to honor them. It's asking for support in a world that punishes people for doing so. It's saying, I deserve to exist in this world as I am, when everything around you says, be more palatable, be more productive, be less. When people call me a professional victim, what they're really saying is, you're breaking the rules. You're not hiding. You're not pushing through. You're not pretending everything is fine. And that's unsettling because it challenges their definition of success. It challenges their illusion of control. But I'm not here to make people comfortable with a broken system. I'm here to redefine what success even means, because success without sustainability is just slow collapse. And I want something better for me, for every autistic and ADHDer out there who's been told their needs are too much. We've been operating under the delusion that emotional stoicism, masking, and overextension are the marks of maturity. But what if they're not? What if maturity is recognizing your limits and refusing to abandon yourself? What if success is building a life that fits your brain and your body, even if the world doesn't understand it yet? That's what I'm advocating for. Not a pity party, not a permission slip to disengage from life, but a radical reframe of what it means to thrive as a neurodivergent. Because when we let go of toxic definitions of strength, we make room for something more powerful: self-trust, community care, and compassion that sustains us. So no, I don't have a victim mentality. What I have is vision. I have the vision to imagine a world where autistics and ADHDers aren't just tolerated, they're supported, celebrated, and understood. Where accommodations aren't treated like special favors, but like the foundation of a society that actually values all of its people. Where asking for help is wisdom rather than weakness. Where vulnerability is met with care. Because what I'm advocating for isn't handouts. It's not entitlement. It's not fragility. It's love. And if that makes people uncomfortable, so be it. Because comfort has never been the measure of justice. And if telling the truth makes people squirm, that says more about the stories they desperately need than the lives we're trying to protect. I want a world where no one feels like they have to earn rest, to hide their needs, to wear a mask just to survive the day. I want a world where people aren't afraid to say, this isn't working for me, and are met with curiosity, not contempt. Because when we build that world, we all win. Every time we make things more accessible, more humane, more flexible, we create systems that are better for everyone. Every ramp, every sensory-friendly space, every flexible deadline, every moment of compassion, they might seem like neurodivergent wins, but in actuality, they're human wins. So when people tell me I'm being too needy, too whiny, too political, I remind myself that the problem is that we've been taught not to feel at all, to not raise our voices, to not complain about injustice. And I refuse to shut that down. I refuse to teach others to shut it down, because numbness doesn't lead to progress. Compassion does. Whether you are neurodivergent or neurotypical, none of us are burdens. We are not broken. We are not weak. We are people. And we deserve to live in a world that recognizes that being human means interdependent. That needing help is not a flaw, it's a fact of life. And if we can finally build a world around that truth, then maybe the next generation of neurodivergents won't grow up ashamed of who they are. Maybe they'll grow up proud. Maybe they'll grow up free. If you found this video helpful, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and share it with anyone you think might benefit from my content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.